Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Dr. Bonnie Riley is here with us today, and she is going to talk about attachment and co-occupations. So thank you so much, Dr. Riley, for coming.
Thank you all for having me. I'm looking forward to our next 50, 60 minutes together. As Dr. Barlow said, I will talk to us a little bit today about engaging parents and looking at the importance of that because of attachment and co-occupations. I will be coming at this from the perspective of, I currently am a faculty member at St. Kate's University, where I have some clinical practice still and some scholarship. But before that, I spent over 15 years in clinical practice working with children and their families. And then I had my own family, which just added more to think about when we thought about this, but this topic specifically. So I spent a good number of years and hours thinking about it, living it. And so it is something that is super important to me, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you all a little bit today about it. This quote here on the screen, "We've made lots of changes at home," was something that a client's mother told me when I was checking in with her and seeing how things were going and if they were noticing, any changes and improvements. And she affirmed, yes, there have been good changes, and that's because we've made lots of changes at home. And I think this quote is important to think about and to capture, everything that we're going to talk about over this next time together, of how we engage those parents and what we're thinking of when we're engaging those parents. And you can see from the two images here, it's important to do that because there can be a different interpretation, a different meaning for each of our clients and their families. And ultimately, our success as pediatric occupational therapy professionals and practitioners is dependent on our ability to successfully engage parents, caregivers, and family within their family environment, within that context that they call home. So now on the screen, you'll see just kind of a brief overview of where we're going to go in our time together. First, we'll talk a little bit about attachment patterns and some of the theory around that, making sure we're all talking about the same thing. And how that impacts the services that you provide. Next, we'll talk a little bit about co-occupations, which kind of arise from attachment patterns and parent-child engagement, and how that those, as a pediatric occupational therapy professional, those are important because when we are providing services, we're working with the child and the family. So ultimately, we are addressing not just occupations, but truly co-occupations. And then finally, we'll wrap up our time together talking about some strategies for engaging parents and caregivers during your sessions. All right, so family-centered care principles, the idea of engaging parents comes from this concept, this theory, which is pervasive throughout healthcare. It is pervasive internationally, and some of the core principles, some of the key ideas to family-centered care, which has been around for a good amount of time now, and yet it's still something that we are continually researching, thinking about, and trying to understand better, from the idea to the actual how do we do this. But as you can see there on the screen, some of the key principles are that we treat all families with respect and dignity, knowing that they are the experts. We may feel like we've gone to education and been trained in occupational therapy, and that should make us the experts, but truly they are the experts of their family, their lives, their occupation, and the meaning that is in their family context. Another key idea or principle is information sharing. So it's not just one way. It's not just us as the OT professional giving something to the client. It's an exchange of information. It is really important that we're getting that information from families. So hence, it's a partnership and it's collaborative. Again, the flow of information is both ways, and there's flexibility in that. we may have a protocol or a certain idea about how things should happen. For example, we may be doing a splint and we have, for a child, and we have an idea of, a pattern and a wearing schedule. And yet when we work with that family, we realize we're gonna have to be flexible in what we know. We still need to keep them safe, but we're gonna have to be flexible in that because it's not gonna work within their family context. And then ultimately, as I just said, within the services we're providing are within the context of the family and their community. And as you hopefully are still thinking of that, the images on the first page, that's very important because it's going to be very different depending on where you're providing services and depending on where your clients and their families live. So next, kind of another key idea then as we think about family-centered care and being in a partnership with family and their children that we're providing the services to, is that the experiences that our children are engaging in are what are going to, from infancy and even in utero, are what are going to build that architecture, that neuro architecture, the brain architecture. And in order for that architecture to be formed well, it's critical that our clients have, or that we help them have healthy social relationships. I am going to pause for just a second because I have some different things happening here. So give me just a second. I'm going to stop my screen share for just a second. If you have any questions, this is a good time to ask them as we get started. I know we haven't gotten started too far yet, but give me just a second. Let me switch things around here.
You guys would have to just take yourselves off mute if you have a question. And throughout the remainder of the presentation, you can either interrupt Dr. Riley at any time if you have a question, or you can type the question in the chat box and I will interrupt her.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, hopefully back up and going here. I had notes and they weren't showing up, and I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something that I wanted to share with you. So as we were in, see, this is why I knew there was something else I wanted to bring up now. As we think about the need for healthy social relationships, understanding that that is important in building, it's an important factor when we think about building resiliency for children, which, as we all live in a COVID world now, we understand the importance of resiliency. And again, knowing what things look like at home, because everybody's home life probably looks different now than it did 2 months ago. So with the idea of resiliency is understanding that there are certain personal characteristics and protective factors that can help to support resiliency. And number one on the list is a supportive adult-child relationship, parent-child relationship. Other protective factors include strong community support. So again, we know that sometimes we don't have all 5 of these factors, or we may have challenges in one area, but we do know that it's the whole, it's the entirety of all these things together that help create a child's resiliency, helps to build healthy social relationships, and then as we go on and talk about that importance of healthy social relationships, that overall neurofunctioning and brain organization. So also, from self-efficacy, a child's ability and then the parent family's ability to have positive communication skills, to express themselves, their needs, their feelings, to ask for help. All very important when we think about areas in which we might also provide intervention. If there's something in that parent-child relationship, we're going to be working on that, but we can also work on these other areas too. We certainly are equipped to help children and families with adaptive coping skills, helping them process information and solve problems. We also are able to provide intervention to help them regulate their emotions and be able to change their plans and their goals as needed. And then the last on the list here as a protective factor to help support resiliency is the ability to address spirituality with our children and their families. And so by that meaning, including a source of faith and a source of hope from their cultural context. So you can see the importance of starting with understanding the family and all the family care principles in order to then address and build a child's resiliency and build their protective factors, which arguably are very important for every child that we're seeing because they already have some challenges that they're working on overcoming. So we'll take a minute here to talk a little bit about social development. If we know that we are wired to be social and that we need to have healthy social in order to have kind of healthy brain organization, then it seems good to pause for a minute and just remember and explore where and how this parent-child relationship is interwoven throughout the social development. So at the top, you'll see, the social development is the definition, that process during which a child is learning to interpret, to internalize and use information. And it's using cues gleaned or gathered from relationships. So, a child's response to pain is often, when they're very young, they will look to the parent to see, should this hurt? Should this not hurt? How should I respond? Should I be worried? Should I not? So again, from that very young age, in utero, before birth, children are starting to form an attachment pattern with their caregivers. And it's usually very solidly formed, in whichever form that is, by 6 months, and then shapes this ongoing developmental pattern. The second thing to think about here is that infants are biologically, we as human beings are biologically prepared, it's part of our genes, part of our DNA, our makeup, to participate in interactions, to have this attachment bond with our caregiver. Why? Because as an infant, we're dependent on that relationship to be able to function, to occupationally function. We need that relationship in order to eat, in order to take care if the infant has a messy diaper or when they're tired. So again, we as human beings are designed to be socially engaged because it's what we needed from the time of infancy to meet our needs. And then as the caregiver is able to respond to that infant, that develops this pattern, these relationship patterns, and is important for not just the infant and how they can trust or develop a sense of their needs being met, but also for the parent and how that infant responds. So again, understanding that it goes both ways. And then ultimately the desire, the hope is that the parent and infant will have a secure attachment, knowing that there's ranges within secure attachment, and part of the social development does include separation anxiety at certain intervals where the nervous system is continually developing. Things like separation anxiety are normal. Also understanding that when we have that secure attachment, again, as we talked about the importance for healthy social interactions, that it does ultimately contribute to better child mental health and social interactions. So going on a little bit more, thinking about, whoops, that took us too far. Thinking about the attachment patterns, understanding that there are certain things that both the child has and the parent has that contribute to this relationship, certain traits and behaviors, and then how each of those interact will determine the quality of the attachment. If you have more than one child, you likely see that. You likely see that each child kind of has this unique setup of their temperament and how they prefer to interact. And then how that matches with you and your ability as an adult or parent forms these relationship patterns. So, temperament is a person factor related to that child. It is something that can be influenced by the environment. And then the interaction style is a balance of the emotional capacities, the socialization, their desired activity level. So if you have somebody that maybe, happy versus angry emotionally? Just where do they tend to gravitate towards? Do they, they have more positive or more negative kind of viewpoint? Do they prefer to be in the middle of people, or are they more comfortable kind of not being in front of people? Are they somebody who likes lots of activity, or are they somebody that needs maybe a little bit less energy in their day? And so again, all of those things kind of contribute to what we might describe as an easy child, a difficult child, or a slow to warm up child. Depending on how the child responds when they're upset, and what their rhythm is throughout the day. Something that's important to note before we go on here too is that attachment, again, we are biologically prepared for attachment patterns. It is something that persists regardless of the quality of care that's received. So we will attach, and we will attach in different ways. And here's a list of some of the different ways that we as human beings will attach. Secure, autonomous, being when the child is emotionally well adjusted, they're low in anxiety. They may have anxiety in certain times, in certain situations, and they're also low in avoiding. So that's what we desire. That's what we hope for in having kind of that on our list of protective factors, and as a support for forming healthy social relationships and healthy occupation engagement. However, it's also possible, again, from the myriad of things that contribute to this, that the attachment may be preoccupied. Sometimes this occurs when it's unpredicted, like how the caregiver may be available, or maybe the caregiver isn't sensitive to the child's emotional needs, and may discourage some of that child's independence. Again, a mismatch. There's a mismatch happening, and it may not be for any one thing, but maybe the caregiver just doesn't understand. As a clinician, you probably see that sometimes where you are working, for example, on helping a parent to understand that a child is sensitive to touch. And so the parent that just may be how they prefer to interact. They may prefer to lay a loving hand on their shoulder, or to ruffle the hair, to tell their child it's okay. They may be trying to calm a child that's just prone to being upset more, and they may be not understanding that child's preference for not being touched and how that bothers them further. So again, you can see where some of these mismatches may happen, how we as occupational therapy professionals really can help understand and shed light on these areas to, again, hopefully have better connections as we are able to observe a child's social and emotional behaviors, because both of those factors contribute to these attachment patterns. The last one on the list is avoidant dismissing, and this is when a child's basic needs may be met, but perhaps the caregiver or parent is unable to respond to the child, again, on that emotional level. So for whatever reason, there's some kind of disconnect happening. Maybe they're stressed about something or worried about something, and the child is emotionally worried about something different. And again, there's just not that shared kind of motivation, emotional connection. And so then this can result in, hence the word dismissing close relationships, because the child learns that it's difficult to seek comfort from others, and so they may become emotionally distant. But again, to kind of bring this back full circle as we think about the different patterns, attachment is that process during which infants are biologically prepared to participate in interactions with their caregiver to meet those basic needs. And if we can promote healthy attachment patterns to a caregiver, then that's going to further that child's opportunities to engage in occupations. And there's ranges within the normal, including, anxiety is normal. There is a good place for that. There certainly can be too much, but there also is a good place. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So as I said, when we are thinking attachment patterns, we have to observe these social behaviors as well as the emotional behaviors. Listed on the screen here are some of the social behaviors that you may observe. What is their preference for familiarity? will they only kind of socialize with people that they're super familiar with, or are they happy in a room with nobody they've ever seen again, and they're happy to mingle? And you know this, if you think about your last time that you were with other people, you know that there's a different preference for engaging on a familiarity level. Also, how comfortable is the child with separating? Caveat, yes, some distress over separation is normal, but again, we see that come and go through different aspects of development. Proximity seeking. Is a child always needing to be very close to that primary caregiver? Are they okay playing in the next room over? I can still think to children that, that there was a mismatch between the parent and the child because the parent needed more space. They had a different need for proximal spacing than the child. The child was not able, did not want to be separated, even one room away. Whether the parent was going to the bathroom or not, they didn't want to be away from the parent. And then the last social behavior is that social affect regulation. How well is the child able to monitor themselves within that group of people? So, quick look here at some of the social development that happens. Through infancy all the way through adolescence, understanding that our attachment patterns are with us before birth, and they form a foundation for which we move all the way through our childhood and into our adulthood. I'm not going to go too much into the specifics here because I'm trying to keep an eye on time. But what you see here on the screen is a combination of the theories from Erickson and Greenspan, from where we socially progress as we, from infancy, develop trust to early childhood, beginning to experience more emotions and wanting a little bit of separation, to middle childhood where we're happy with our parents. And in adolescence, we still need, again, that attachment pattern prevails. We do still need to be close to our parents, but that relationship's going to change a little bit. And ultimately, right now in adolescence, the right now is what's most important. And adolescents are going to start to narrow their circle of people. And all of that is part of normal social development. So the other piece that we have when we think about attachment patterns are the emotional behaviors that we can observe. Again, is the motivation the same for both parent and child? As you look at this picture, seems okay, but I would argue that perhaps they're not both motivated by the same thing. Whatever the dad's excited about, the girl's not. So we would call that a little bit of a mismatch. But the emotional responding, we could argue that he's not out of tune with knowing that his daughter isn't super excited. And again, he's there and presumably things are okay. We're moving through the space because that caregiver is there and able to respond to the child's emotions. So as we think about emotional behaviors, it's where we have emotional signaling, and we get that from the nonverbal cues. We see that on the child's faces. Her face is a little bit, flat. Maybe her smile is a little upside down, and the dad is super excited, and we see that in his eyebrows and in his mouth. Together, they're signaling. Hopefully they're going to develop a shared meaning. And that shared meaning doesn't always have to be that we both love this. They both may not love whatever they're looking at. Let's say it's, a busy playground. But the fact that they're attuned and that they know how each other is feeling, dad's excited, daughter not as much, that is what is important. That is that is the place from where we can begin to work. We can begin to build these emotional health and build that ability to overcome emotional conflicts, and ultimately from young childhood into middle childhood, prepare that child for learning. So again, in summary, those are all the things that we can observe as we're observing some of the social and the emotional pieces of that attachment pattern. I'm going to skip through this one real quick, just a quick list of some of the differences as that emotional health is developing through childhood, as they again begin to regulate their emotions and expand their emotions, and then how that parallels with their increasing occupational participation, ideally, to the culmination of then, when they are an adolescent, being able to develop that personal identity, being able to understand the past and move into the future. And so again, through each of these steps, it's important, the parent's role in that attachment pattern, that relationship pattern, is important. So you, as the OTA or OT professional, can help to determine the relationship, the social and the emotional patterns of the parent, of the child, and looking for how they fit together, and helping to identify the areas that they may not fit together, and adapting and working through that so that you can help them be as attuned as possible. So this idea of goodness of fit is when we make sure that the task abilities or the task demands match the abilities of that child, and then ultimately the child and the parent. So if we are going to send them to a busy playground, for example, making sure that ultimately through that parent-child relationship that there's going to be understanding of and shared motivation, and that ultimately something can be adapted in order to ensure that that girl, the daughter who is not as excited about the playground, can find a way to fit, to meet the task demands, or find an area of the playground that she can be happy with. And that's where we have goodness of fit, and can adapt to support a goodness of fit. In this image, you'll see, there's one boy aside from the rest of the family who's kind of looking off and doing something different. He may have, again, if we go back to thinking about temperament, he may have some different emotional regulations right now. He may be a little bit more excited than the rest of his family. He may be motivated by something that they're not motivated by right now. And so he's not really fitting into what's happening in the family right now. And so again, this is from where we can begin using our abilities to analyze activities, understanding the social and the emotional piece of those activities, to help identify how we can adapt the activity, the task, the demands in the environment to make sure that there is a good fit. And when we are doing that, then we will be led into thinking about some different relationship interventions. You can see from the two images here, the boys are checking each other out on the left, and then getting to a place, and maybe at different activity levels. Maybe, again, if we think about the social and the emotional behaviors, they're both showing different social and emotional kind of behaviors and needs in the picture on the left over here. And then by the time we look over here at the right, their focus has come to the same thing, and they're both at the same energy level, and they're in this synchrony, in this rhythm pattern together. And this is ultimately the goal of relationship interventions, that through relationship interventions, we are able to help, sometimes it's siblings, sometimes it's the parent and the child, but ultimately forge and maintain that relationship that we know ultimately is important for the social development and the occupation participation. And through the relationship interventions, we are concerned with the ability to kind of what we call social affect regulation, the ability to regulate our responses and our emotions and our interpretation of is this a threat, is this a worry, or is this not? So that's again where sometimes a little anxiety, a little bit of apprehension or nervousness, like the girl thinking about the playground, or maybe the younger boy here who's like maybe a little bit apprehensive of his brother who seems to have more energy, is determining, is this something I need to be worried about? Is this a threat, or can we come together? So that process is what we do to overcome that and have that rhythmicity together is the process of social affect regulation, and hopefully working then as needed if truly there isn't a threat response, addressing that too, so that we can have that shared socialization. Threat responses and understanding that we communicate those as we what's called emotionally signaling and developing that shared meaning. So when we think about threat responses, so maybe the child that was hurt and looking to the mother or the father or the caregiver that's there and looking for some kind of signal of how should I respond? And then together developing a shared meaning of, well, I bumped into the couch. Should that have really hurt me, like to the point where I'm going to be crying and upset for hours, or is it going to be okay? Together, the parent, the child develop that meaning. And so that's one example, but that certainly can occur in lots of different ways. So, and develop in lots of ways as life is full of new social and sensory experiences. And through each of those experiences, when we're engaged and attuned and in a relationship, an attuned relationship with somebody, we can develop that meaning, we can signal each other, and we can work through that together and overcome. Because again, we know that's a protective factor. We know that's something that will help build our resiliency and help us overcome. And all of development is a cycle of that. So again, that's why these healthy social relationships really help development and that the brain organization. The second point here, it's important to help families understand their child's communication during the experiences. So helping a parent to understand a child's expression, or if a child's chewing on their shirt a little bit, helping the parent understand what that child is really saying, even though they're not saying it with words, they're saying it in some of their behaviors and some of their actions. And that's important because first you have to understand what the child's trying to tell you, so that then you can go, okay, well, why is he chewing on his shirt? What is causing stress for him right now? Is it something in this room? Is it something beyond this room? And that can be important to then examine and find the patterns over time, and help to, again, connect the parent and child in their emotional signaling and create that attunement. And the more we're predictable in our interactions, the more that can help the child as they are learning and experiencing new and novel situations. So our consistency comes in the things that we do every day. We have rhythms and patterns as occupational human beings. If you have a child, those occupations are going to be shared. A child is, increasingly growing in their independence, but even in that independence, there are aspects that are shared. You're in the same physical space, or you're, doing the same thing together. And so those concepts are important when we think about addressing occupations of a child, because those occupations are truly co-occupations with the family. Co-occupations are the experiences of the child that are interwoven with their family. They are shared. They may be shared between siblings or child and parent caregiver. And so it's important for us as OT professionals to help promote positive interactions during these co-occupations. Again, promoting positive social behaviors, emotional behaviors, and then ultimately play skills. We know from the perspective of the child, what the parent may think the co-occupation is some household chore, but from the child's perspective, it's all play. So when we can find the opportunity to share play and leisure, and again, hopefully pulling the adult, the parent, into a leisure task too, that's important. It's important for the family health, as well as the parents' well-being and competency. The one thing parents want are for their children to be happy. So, so when we can find this attunement, find the synchronous rhythmicity in shared occupations, then it's ultimately going to bolster and support and boost the parents' perception of their ability to be a parent. And so again, looking at how to do that, how to create and build that positive affect, and the ability using play embedded throughout the day in the rhythm of the things the adult needs to do, but in a way that, again, establishes that shared meaning between child and family. I want to pause, and I should have paused between talking about attachment and before shifting into part 2 here with co-occupations. But do we have any questions so far as we, on attachment before I shift us into co-occupations?
Remember, you need to take yourself off mute if you have a question.
All right, well, I will keep rolling, but feel free, speak up. You can interrupt me. I'll find my thought again and we'll keep moving. But I know it's late there too, so you may be just kind of sitting and absorbing as well. So, Kate, you came back on. Do we have a question? Okay. I'm trying to follow the nonverbals of the video flashing on and off too. But okay, so we'll talk a little bit more.
Actually, Dr. Riley, we do have a question, but I did want to mention that I know at least one person's from Zimbabwe, so they're like 7 or 8 hours ahead. So it's really late for them, like 11 o'clock at night, I think we figured out. So we do appreciate all of you being here. But the question from Nora was how the intervention goes.
Sure, the intervention in a session. Nora, if you could, I'm going to talk a little bit more about occupations and we'll go to the intervention. Can you tell me more, which aspect of the intervention are you thinking? Are you thinking about, if there's something specific that you're thinking about, if you could give me a little bit more detail and type that in.
Why don't you keep going and then I'll interrupt you again. Oh, she said about the attachment strengthening.
Sure. So attachment strengthening, again, if we think about the ability first to recognize the cues and the clues. So the first thing that you might do as you're playing or involved in an activity is to make sure that the parent is understanding the child's cues, their signals. So you might pause or stop the play and help the parent understand, oh, he doesn't like to be touched. And I could tell that made him nervous because he started to chew his shirt or, insert any other behavior. So that's one thing, kind of pausing the action. Child's going to keep going, but pausing the action for the parent and really kind of shining a spotlight on what you observed and what you think that child was communicating. And I say that because, again, if we remember our family-centered principles, you have to really trust that they're the expert and collaborate with them. You certainly have a unique perspective from the sake of understanding the child's physical and cognitive and emotional and sensory processing and abilities, and you'll want to share that and collaborate and help to create that understanding with the parent. And in that you might say, I just noticed him showing or chewing on his shirt. Do you ever see that? And as you have that discussion on that behavior, that thing that you've observed, that's truly that child signaling, that's the first step, because you have to make sure that they're not missing signals. Then when you're doing play, and we'll get down to some specific activities, but especially when you're at this level where maybe there's not a good attachment, maybe they're missing signals, there's not that rhythmicity of child communicates, parent responds, in the back and the forth, then thinking about rhythmic activities. That could be swinging. It could be having the parent just pushing the child on a swing. So if we know that there's so many misses and challenges with attunement and the child likes to swing, then finding the activities that the child likes to do and how you can build that back and forth and kind of responding to cues and clues within that play. Greenspan calls them circles, and so in a normal play, there's, 25 to 50, like many circles back and forth between the parent and the child. And so that's what you're going to look for when you're providing that intervention for attachment. It could just be rolling a ball back and forth, trusting, I'm going to roll the ball to you, you're going to roll it back. And we know our clients, and we know that sometimes we may be doing good just to get the ball back and forth once. We're starting at a very, very low level, but that's where and how you'll start with it. You'll start with the give and the take, the back and the forth. trying to find rhythmicity in the preferred activities of the child, and responding to cues and helping the parent to understand the cues that are being communicated. All right, let's see here. And I see we've got another question coming or something.
Nora was saying thank you.
Okay, okay. It kind of flashes like a little, I got flashes all over the place. But they're all related to Zoom, so you don't have to worry about my vision or my cognition. I think it's all virtual here, virtual flashes. Okay, so the next thing, just thinking about the co-occupations, and as the child and parent are engaging in activities together, as we were just talking about in the example, I could have paid Nora to ask that question, right? It leads me right into our first thing here is attunement. That shared emotional social place, the joined intention, meaning that the parent and child together have a similar focus. So think about the boys, you know, when the two boys came together in the window and they were side by side, they had that shared intention. They were both very intent on figuring out whatever was down outside, and thus they had that shared attention. So, you know, the attunement is that co-regulation and the ability to regulate the affect, the emotion. The intention is that you have the same goal. You're working to the same end. And then the attention, that you are both able to focus on the same thing. So you could even have multiple sessions working on each of those three aspects, right? Like if you have an activity and you're trying to just have, you know, two siblings or a parent and a child be calm all the way through reading a book or through, you know, putting on shoes, you could have that, you know, both parent and child are able to look at the same thing for a certain amount of time, that they're focusing on the same thing together, that they have the same goal of, hey, we want to get to the door together. And so we're going to try to get there together. You know, you could have and one of the strategies then would be having them go, you know, side by side, or one person waiting at the door for the other one to get there, knowing that we both have the same goal of, we just want to get to the door together. The joined attention would be that ability to establish and maintain the focus on the same object or event. You know, so that together, you know, maybe the preferred is a certain cartoon or a certain, you know, watching a spinning fan. And if that's where you have to start, then that's where you have to start, and parent and child together spend time looking at that fan. And then once you both have that shared attention, you can begin to build on that and maybe shift, like, oh yeah, the fan's cool, but oh, look at the dog. And can you do a shift in attention together? Okay. So last kind of thought on the co-occupations, understanding just that a co-occupation is having that shared meaning, and that shared meaning means that you are, you know, in that same physical space, that you are having, you know, a similar emotional response to it, and again, that shared intention and the shared time. So those are, you know, when we look at the definition of co-occupations, we see that they're very closely aligned to those key pieces of building attachment. And you know, as I've said many times, in childhood, co-occupations are inevitable. There we go. Quick look at the neurology of co-occupations, understanding that when you're doing activities together, there's going to be shared smells, shared touches as somebody's beside you or helping you with something, shared sounds, and understanding that there may be different comfort for some of those. And so that's something to think about too, in how do we share this activity? How do I not feel like everything that's happening in this shared activity is going to send me into a threat response and challenge my ability to attach and connect and relate to this person? You know, and through that is where then we begin to get to build that. Here's the response I'm getting, and I can trust that this is what's going to happen. And that is where you know, we begin to form our responses, and we begin to attach then different forms of input, like sensory input, to them. We begin to connect the sensory input to meanings. Quick look at the caregiver influence on participation. As you can see here from the little diagram at the bottom, if a caregiver is able to recognize what the child is trying to communicate, then the caregiver can try to help that child with their regulation, responding, the stress recovery, the responding to that threat, so that then they can have that better co-occupation participation. So, you know, caregiver sensitivity, fundamental piece of the attachment, building into that social affect regulation and an ability to continue on, so that then, you know, ultimately our goal as occupational therapists, create that better participation. And there's research to support that, you know, there appears to be social processes in order to help support that physiological recovery from everyday stressful situations. But it first understands knowing that everybody has a different temperament, a different physiological basis from which they're beginning. And that's where, as OTs, we can help the parent to understand, this is how you like to respond, and this is how your body responds, and this is how your child's body responds, and working together through that. And in that process, then we promote attunement, and help, as I've said multiple times now, the family, the parent, to understand what their child is trying to communicate to, and help focus on what is, you know, what are they trying to tell us and why? Like, what's causing that? What's the stress that's causing the child to need to communicate? And again, you'll see just some things to think about here. Their expressions, their smiles. Are they able to maintain eye contact? That's a good sign that you're in that place where you're going to begin to exchange, that you're going to trust and exchange and build that attunement, that shared focus. And again, helping the caregivers figure out how to be predictable. Sometimes when nothing is working, a caregiver keeps trying something, anything over, you know, and it's always new, it's always different. So it's also important to try to help the caregiver find ways that they can be consistent in responding to the child, because the more that they're changing things up and just trying anything and nothing's working, the more they're feeding into kind of that disorganization. So then, if our whole goal of you know, providing relationship interventions and promoting the parent-child relationship and engaging that parent is attunement, then we need a couple of strategies, a couple of things to think about as we begin to think about our services and how we're going to engage the family. As I said, you can coach that caregiver to have more sensitive responses, to understand their child's cues, through that process, remaining positive. And that may be hard depending on the parent and what the child is doing makes the parent feel. But that's part of the being the adult, being the parent. And you know, you may have to then help support the parent in figuring out what they need to help them through it too. And then providing strategies to, again, break activities down, create that scaffold. Where's that first level that we need to start at to building some more interactive play. And you'll see kind of the hexagons there, just some of the different key ideas that you need to think about when using your activity analysis in this parent-child relationship in a family-centered care sort of way. So when you think about intervention, you have the beginning of your session, and as it begins, it's first important to determine, how are they arriving? What is their state of mind? What are the tasks that are important? You know, from the last time you saw the child, that may have changed. So all of those are really important to figuring out what is this dyad? What are the parent and the child, the family and the child really working on? And then during the session, doing some role playing. So if the child's having a hard time, you know, offering the role play, and then let the parent step in. Using praise, again, that positive aspect, helping to problem solve. And then as the session ends, reflecting and doing some teach back strategies. Do we have questions? I know we're winding down on time. Kate, do we have questions?
We do. So one of the questions is, does personality of the parent have potential to affect the overall intervention?
It absolutely does. And that's what makes it most hard, right? And that's where we have to kind of consider how can I use myself? And that's where that can be hard for us as professionals, right? Because we have different modes that we are, most comfortable in using our therapeutic use of self. And so sometimes a parent may have a certain personality where we have to shift to a place that we're not as comfortable with. And that parent's personality may not be, if we go back to the very beginning and thinking about, temperament and emotions, they may not be a positive person. And it may be hard for us to work with them and help to find that for them. But together, as we work with both child and parent, we're certainly going to be working on that parent's personality and helping to find a match between parent personality and child.
Emmanuel, did you also have a question?
Yes, I also want to ask, do we have to use, in terms of the intervention, is it a top-bottom approach or bottom-top, or does it really matter what kind of intervention strategy you use, or you have to look at the personality of the child?
You're going to have to switch between both, probably. And for one parent child, it may be different than the other. And you may have to switch back and forth between them. You may be doing kind of that top-down approach and working in, like, this is the occupation. They want to brush teeth. So we're working on brushing teeth. And you may be working on that and working to see where are they missing a signal. And maybe the parent goes to put their hand on the child while they're brushing the teeth, and the child, like, you see like this extension response, right? And that child wasn't happy. So then you have to switch to the bottom up and almost kind of pause and say, okay, let's work on this basic skill right here. So that's where you're going to have to balance between the bottom up and the top down, and sometimes very quickly in a session before, it gets derailed. And sometimes you may not realize that till afterwards. And that's where that end of the session reflection is really important. When you go, and you may be having a conversation with the parent going, because it may just end. It may just end really quick. And you were doing your top down and you may be reflecting on it at the end and go, parent, like, I saw them kind of arch a little bit. And I think maybe he didn't like it when you touched him in that way. So I think next time we're going to start working on just that one little part. And that's where you scaffold, right? You take that one little skill, that bottom up, and scaffold back into that entire occupation of brushing teeth. Great question. Okay. So and I hope if you guys have more questions, go, because we're out of time and it's super late. Go ahead and type them in, and if I don't get to all of them, I will record something or email something too. I'm going to kind of skip through the last couple of slides here, and I will share the slides with Kate so she can email them, Dr. Barlow, so she can email them to you, because I know some of the information I haven't flushed out entirely. I did warn her. I'm like, oh, this is going to be hard to do in an hour, but I could, I love this topic. I could talk about it for a long time. So, but couple key points as we wind down in our final 3 minutes. Play. It's an important, we know it's important for children. It's sometimes harder for adults, right? Because we know what we have to get done in a day, but follow the child's lead. If you want to build attunement, the adult's not going to be able to come in and say, child, I want to look at this book. And the child wants to look at the fan. You've got to follow the child's lead. And where is their attention? If you want to bring them to what you think is important. As the therapist, helping to describe the child's play like a sportscaster, that gives you that ability to give them additional input and connect with them. Like, if in no other way, if they can tolerate you talking, then figure out how you can participate with them in that same activity. If they don't want you being anywhere near them, but they're okay with your voice, then stand back and be the sportscaster until they will let you into their play. Ultimately, at the end of the day, bringing the positivity, bringing the playfulness is how you're going to begin to find the positive affect and the desire to share attention and move forward. And so I had listed here just a couple of ideas for different age ranges and different ways that you might, again, build this shared attention, shared intention, and the connection of signaling and attunement at the different developmental levels. And these were kind of just summary points here of, how do we, when we have co-occupations, how do we as adult and child, as parent and child, share the rhythmicity, do we have the same performance abilities? Do we have the routines that we need? Do we have the same motivation to complete this? You know, as the OT, we need to then also determine what skills do they have and don't they have, and how can we build those? Again, a little bit more from that bottom up. What are the opportunities? What are the demands in the environment? And then ultimately, obviously, we have to build trust. We have to be flexible in our interaction patterns and responsive and flexible and collaborative to build the trust, so that when we are jumping in the middle of an occupation, they will trust and share what information they have while we share what information we have to build this better attunement. This is going to stick me through all kinds of, sorry guys, I'm last minute here and I've got something with lots and lots of flashes, but I see a question came up. This slide is just really showing the continuum of, in the session, having parents involved versus engaged, passively involved versus actively engaged, and some of the different things you might see, you know, on that continuum of how they're engaged in your session. And ultimately, you want them actively engaged in order to help them acquire skills at having this better relationship. These are some prompts and things you might hear, because it's not always easy, and the opportunities to say, how can we take this and redirect this and guide us back into better attunement, better alignment, even if parent and child have different personalities. This last slide here was just an opportunity to share, you know, one experience that I had reflected on of, you know, this particular parent and child. He often would say that he was passively involved. He would come back into the area that we were providing intervention, but would often be on his phone or not necessarily sharing that same intention or attention to the activity. And so as time went on, and I had to work a little bit to build those bridges to get the parent involved, got him passively there, but I needed him actively. You know, and so I involved him. I involved him in the play activity. And ultimately I knew I was successful as, you know, I saw the dad getting more playful, and I saw the son meeting his goals and participation even more so because of the dad's participation. And ultimately that full circle of dad like pulling out his phone and taking a picture, because both he and son were having that shared moment. They were attuned. They were catching each other's signals. They were both intent on the same thing. They were both focusing on the same thing. And the foundation was being built for better occupational participation. So I will leave us on that. 1 minute over. I do apologize.
It's okay. We have one question. Do you mind?
Sure.
All right. For adolescents, what if their understanding is as low as a toddler? Do we still engage in the new identity activities or step back to their level of understanding?
So that's where we have these hierarchies and continuums of development, but you want to meet them where they are, but are they ever going to have a new identity? Are they ever going to be able to socially interact in that level? You have to think, although we anticipate that by the adolescent years, somebody's going to be forming their own identity and have their own personal identity. And maybe they do, but they're still interacting on the lower level. You have to address their skills where they're at. You can't, you know, you have that aspiration that they're going to have their own personal identity, but you're going to have to go back to the level where they are at. And so if that's just in that exchanging information, or both being able to focus on the same thing, then that's where you'll have to start. And you might be able to do that, you know, if they have interest in, you know, a car magazine, then you would start with that. You would start with that, what they're motivating, and you know that's motivating for them because you know that they're at that age where they're hopefully having their own identity. But you would back down your activity to the level of building the specific skill that they need to truly express and engage at that level. Thank you guys. Good question.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Riley. We really appreciate your expertise. If any of you have follow-up questions, you can always email me and I will forward them to Dr. Riley.
Absolutely. Thank you guys all for being